We lived downriver from the East Coast, particularly specifically uh, Pennsylvania, Pittsburgh area, and the weather. What we didn't have TV in those days, of course, but the radio was our source of national news, and they were saying that the forecast was for the Ohio River to continue to rise because we were getting more rain east of Maysville, and so we moved. We loaded what we could carry on our literally on our backs and walked down the street from a block and a half or so to where Aunt Mally lived, and slept in her on her second floor that evening. And when we got up in the morning, it was daylight, so there was no lighting problem, and she had a stairway with a 90-degree turn in it, as I remember. When we came down from the second floor to the first floor, I remember standing at the foot of the stairway and looking from the stairway towards the front door and seeing the river water, start to seep in underneath this door. So literally, the river was outside. We were surrounded by Ohio River at that point.
Was Aunt Mally farther or closer to the river than your house?
We were both at the same distance, essentially from the river, parallel to it, living on Second Street. Second Street was parallel to the river, and both of my mother's property and Aunt Mally's property faced the river, and so our backyards. You went from the back of the house to the back porch, if you had a back porch, to the backyard, and there was an alley behind the backyard parallel to Second Street and the Ohio River, and then there was a garden area, a good-sized garden area, and then a sloping bank that led down to the river, and so you could almost stand in your backyard prior to the high water, stand in your backyard distance and see the river. And so when the Ohio River swelled from volume, which came downstream from the Pennsylvania area, it went into your garden first, and then then it creeped up into your backyard, and then eventually into your house. Now, my mom said that the word was that you didn't have to worry, the water wasn't going to get that high. So, but we did, for some reason, suspect that we better move, or so there must have been some change in the forecast, and so we put what we could carry in a way of clothing on our backs, literally. And I think they did it carried it or loaded us with a bed sheet full of whatever we wanted to wear, probably the clean clothes for the next day, and walked down the block and a half or so to Aunt Mally's, and slept in one of the bedrooms on her second floor.
You were like 9 or 10? Was this 37?
This was 37, so I would have been 10 years old.
Do you literally remember those couple days?
Yeah, I do.
Were you do you remember your mom or you guys moving some of your precious stuff up to the second floor. Didn't you have a second floor?
No, we didn't have.
Or an attic?
If you later take a look at the letter that Mom, that you have a copy of, that Mom wrote to Margaret Conlon in California, she mentions that. What was it you asked me?
Well, did you have an attic and move anything up?
Mom referred to it as a bungalow, which implied, at least in my mind, a single-story house. And we had the front. You entered into the house, the only floor of the house, except for the basement, by walking up maybe 8 or 10 stairs to a small porch, and then the little living quarters were at that level.
So, do you have any idea what was carried? Like, in other words, did you have family photos or deeds that you took with you?
We did. We took nothing with us that I recall, and the after effect was that we didn't locate any of our pictorial or typewritten or other records from the bungalow. For whatever reason, Mom didn't have us carry any of that down to Aunt Mally's with us when we went. And so as a result, when we finally got back into the bungalow, when the water went down to its normal level again, everything was soaked with muddy water.
How high on your house did it reach? Do you have any idea? In other words, it didn't cover the house, did it?
Mom said that after we had moved from our house to Aunt Mally's house to spend that one or two evenings, and then they carried us out the next morning. Literally carried us from the bottom of the stairway going to her second floor to her front porch, which was covered with water, and they literally carried us out and put us in a boat, a rowboat, what they call a skiff in those days. I don't know what they call it now. And we went to higher ground in near the area in the boat, and that was probably 2 blocks away from her house. And we got out of the boat, and the rest is history. But as far as the bungalow and the water level at the bungalow, we didn't see any more of it after we got carried out in the boat. Later, Mom said she was talking to some people that she knew in Maysville. Mom worked for the city, and so knew a lot of people, and a lot of people knew her. And she ran into somebody that she knew, that she had reason to think would know a little bit about the circumstances. Said, Mr. Smith or whomever, did you see how much damage the water is doing to my house on East 2nd Street? And he said, Miss Margaret, they called her, Miss Margaret, I was by your house in a boat, and the tip of your roof was sticking out of the water. So literally everything that we owned, with a few exception of the few clothes that we carried to Aunt Mally's when we walked down to her house before the water got that high.
Your grandma, my grandma, your mother's letter there, she made that lovely phrase about reticence, the Collins family reticence, the
Yeah.
lack of emotions and sharing what's on her mind and things like that.
Right.
Do you have any memories of you, your sister, your mom, or Aunt Mally, or anybody showing emotion during these 24 hours or whatever?
My mother was not an emotional person herself, and I don't recall her ever. I don't ever recall her emoting as far as uh, crying, for example, as you would expect a housewife or mother to do under normal circumstances. I don't ever remember seeing my mother cry, for example. Now, I'm sure she did. And when her husband passed away, uh, I remember her telling me that my father was sick in bed. This was several years before the flood. My father was sick in bed, and she was getting me dressed the following morning. I suppose I would have been about 7 years old, and she said that Daddy was not going to. He was sick, and he was not going to get better. And I don't remember her crying about showing any emotion. Not that she didn't, I'm sure, but she didn't show her emotion.
If you looked at Dad, are you, and if I can get personal and you can answer or not answer, but with you and your mom and wherever it came from, your dad, your mom, the society at the time, the culture. Were you an emoter, or do you remember crying much in your life? In other words, where do you think that all came? First, do you think that's a family trait, or what would you call it? And have you ever gotten emotional?
I no, I think I was a crybaby at times in my early years. I remember standing out on East Second Street in front of our house, and Mom was taking me someplace. I probably was too young to be in school yet, but I could very well have been. And we didn't have a car, and so when we wanted to go someplace, we went out in front of the house and waited for the city bus, streetcar, I'm sure, for the city streetcar to come by and pick us up, which was a paying proposition for the city of Marion, of Maysville. And we, for whatever reason, we were going. She was taking me to some place, and one of the neighbors who did have a car pulled over to the curb and offered Mom a ride to presumably to the business section of downtown, and I can remember carrying out what's the word, a tantrum.
Yeah.
And I didn't. I said I didn't want to go. So how old was I at that point? I don't know. But I remember standing there and more or less saying, "I'm not going to go," and she said I can remember her telling me, "Come on, John, we have to go," or whatever. It's a wonder she didn't clobber me. But anyway, that, as far as emotion was concerned, but that wasn't particularly emotional in my mind. That was a childish tantrum that I was putting on. I don't know
Yeah.
what would prompt that.
But I mean, with the rest of your life, if you're willing to think about it, we have a generally a stoic nature in the family, at least your side. And I don't know how Dan feels, but with a lot of us, not Jane, as you pointed out, is so matter of fact and so practical. She's like, let's get this done, this done. And I'm not saying she doesn't get emotional. She gets frustrated, mad. But what if you had to guess, Dad? If you had to put a psychologist hat on about you and the family, what would you say the root? If you had to make something up, what would be the root of some of that stoicism?
Gee, I don't know. We Maysville was a small town, and the Collins family had come from Iowa apparently into Ohio, and ultimately some of them stayed in Cincinnati. Several of my aunts, and my father came to Maysville. What brought him to Maysville, I don't know, as a single man. And Mom was from the Brown side of the family, and I don't remember her. She had a great deal of affection for her father, Grandpa Brown, who had passed away before I was born, but was still living when Sis was born. Sis being what 3.5 years or 2.5 years older than I am, but. Mom had a great deal of affection for Grandpa Brown. I don't know to what extent or why, so I assume that there was a closeness there. Now, but Mom's mother, my grandmother, Grandma Brown, apparently was not an affectionate lady, because I don't have any recollection or any stories of Grandma Brown being a warm, affectionate grandma that cooked meals and that sort of thing. Not your typical grandma, I don't think, in my mind. But so my father's three sisters that came to Cincinnati, and one of whom eventually came to Maysville, were warm ladies, but they were not huggy type women, and they two of them were not married, and I don't remember them demonstrating a great deal of affection. I remember when they came to visit, several of them, one in particular, and Hannah Brown or Collins, when she came to Maysville. I remember sitting on her lap and rocking in the rocking chair in the living room. But I don't know if I guess you'd call that emotion. But I don't remember any of us doing. I don't remember doing with them anything in particular that I would say, oh, I really loved that opportunity or this opportunity. I don't have any recollection of that.
As an adult, did you ever cry?
No, I don't believe I ever did.
It's neither here or there.
No,
I'm just curious.
I'm not ashamed of it. I don't remember shedding any tears, even when Mom told me that Daddy was not going to get better, and when it was typical in those days, they took him to the funeral home and. The undertaker and I can't think of the bombed him and then brought his body back and put it in the casket in the living room of our home that we a little while ago referred to as the bungalow. Mom said you tell when I got up that morning. She said, you tell your relatives who've died goodbye by putting your hand in the casket on the dead body to affectionately say, this is the last time I'll have an opportunity to tell you goodbye, so I touched you. I remember doing that, but I don't remember bringing tears to my eyes. And you... Harking back to a question you asked a while ago, I don't remember Sis crying, my sister. She was not a young woman who would sit down. I don't ever remember telling her telling Mom some story that might have brought tears to her eyes or something.
Do you think... I have a bookkeeping question, Dan. If you need anything or you need to move,
I was going to move over here just so
you
Dan
come over
looks
here.
at me.
Come right there. I was going to think the same thing because I don't blame anybody for anything. Dad, with that in mind, are you nostalgic? In other words, do you say, "Boy, I miss the good old days," or "Boy, I know you're just," and I'm not saying you don't have regrets or you don't have this or that, but you say, I assume you say, life is what life is, and the deal is to be a reed in the wind and bend with it.
And I don't think in those terms, but I feel like that I respond to life that pretty much that way without thinking about it. I don't realize that at one point I'll say I'm going to face this situation because this is life. I just automatically do it. That's my nature, and I don't try to change it particularly. So it's just who I am.
Can we do some quick bookkeeping, Dad, or housekeeping? Would you name your dad's full name and his sister's names, married names?
Well, his name was John Thomas Collins, and his sister's names were Catherine, and we called her Aunt Kit, and she was the only married one of the only three of one of his three sisters that was married, and she married a man named Charles Conlon, Conlon, and I don't know. I don't remember what Aunt Kit's middle name was, but by the way, she was I remember her as being a warm lady. She was Dad's oldest sibling, including his oldest sister, and she. I remember her as being friendly and warm, and when I was later in school, at lunchtime, I would sometimes go to the house where she worked as a caretaker, as a, whatever the word is I'm trying to think of, stayed with older women that needed assistance. And I remember Aunt Kit as being a warm, friendly, I was always comfortable with her.
By the way, was she older or younger than your dad?
She was the oldest of the children, and when my dad's mother died, shortly after childbirth in Iowa, to the best of my knowledge, Aunt Kit took over running the household. And she was would not have been married at that point.
So she had three siblings at that time.
My dad had three siblings. Yeah, he had three sisters, and he had another sibling, but I don't know what denomination, male or female, that died either in childbirth or shortly after.
Yeah, and now name your
mothers. Aunt Kit was the oldest of the three women. Then I think the middle girl was Aunt Hannah, and she lived in Cincinnati during my lifetime. She used to come to Maysville and visit us, but she was not married, and she was a warm, personable, I thought was a lovable lady, and then she didn't, to my knowledge, did not get married, and was what's the word? Stayed with older women. That was her income. That was her livelihood, in that she lived with them and got paid. My recollection was they paid her for staying with their elderly parents or whatever. And then the third girl was Aunt B, and sometime later, at an age that I could remember, I was told that Aunt B stood for, in her mind, was Beatrice, and she didn't like the name Beatrice, so everybody called her B. And she was not married, and she worked in the Sinton, Sinton, I believe it was, Cincinnati Hotel. It was one of the 2 or 3 larger hotels in Cincinnati. And she was not married.
Before we get into your mom's family, the Browns, of the 3 sisters, your aunts, knowing how small your mom was, do you remember height comparison of the aunts?
No, I don't remember. I don't remember my mom or any of her relatives as being small or short.
You don't think of your mom that way either?
No, I don't. I don't.
Well, now let's move on to the Brown family.
Okay.
Who were your mothers? What's the birth order?
Mom was one of 4 children. Her mother and father were both from Ireland, and maybe we've already talked about that previously. Mom's oldest sibling was Jim, and Jim Brown was married, and he had 2 children. One was Miles Brown, and one was Catherine Brown. And Miles was not married. Catherine was married, but and had 2 children, but for some reason or other, the marriage didn't work out, so she was divorced at one point. I don't know what the circumstances were, but Miles was one that you've met when you were growing up, and he was very, very close to our family. But Mom, that was James Brown, Mom's oldest brother, and her next oldest sibling was Mike Brown, and Mike, I don't remember what his middle name was, nor do I remember what Jim's middle name was, but Mike's name was synonymous with a hardware store in Maysville, and he also ran previously had continued to run a harness making business, because Maysville was a farming community pretty much, and Uncle Mike had a store, and I can remember the upper level of the store was a room where the men made harness for horses, carriages, and farming, that sort of thing. I presume they would have made saddles, for example. They stitched the leather that they undoubtedly bought from the local farmers at some point. And Mom did not graduate from high school, to the best of my knowledge. They didn't have a high school, as I understood it at that point, but she went to the local equivalent to high school for 2 or 3 years, but there was no graduating facility in Maysville, so she, as far as I know, did not graduate from either the local Catholic school or the local public school, which would have been Maysville Public School. And so that would be Mike Brown, her second oldest sibling, and her third one would be Mary Ellen, who is Aunt Mally, was Aunt Mally, and I don't know how much older Mally was than Mom, but Aunt Mally did get married, and she married a man named Kirwin, Kirwin, and she had two children, one being Margaret, the older of the two, her two children, and the other being Jim Kirwin. I don't remember their middle names. I'm sure they had them, but I didn't. But they were close enough to me that I treated them, and they treated me as if I were their little brother. I don't know exactly why that was, but that we were very close to Aunt Mally's two kids growing up, who were in the 20-something age range, older than I was and that Sis was. And Margaret, the older of the two Kirwin children, did get married. We had cousins in Staten Island, in New York, and that generation of the Brown family were close to the Browns that lived in Staten Island, and used to go back and forth sometime by train. They mostly didn't have a car, and we didn't have a car. But Margaret ended up, as a result of some of her visits to the Staten Island area, in meeting and marrying a man named Charles Sachs, S-A-C-H-S, and that was not probably a German name, but it was not it would not have been today. Looking at the name, you would have said, well, they were probably Jewish, but to the best of my knowledge, Charlie Sachs was not from a Jewish family. He was Catholic. His family. He had a twin brother and some other relatives. But anyway, so Margaret did get married. Aunt Mally's other offspring was Jim, and James did not get married.
This was 37. We back to go to the flood. Did you guys stay in Maysville, Dad? Are you doing okay?
Yeah, I am doing okay. Did we stay in Maysville after the flood?
Uh-huh.
Yes. I was told by the way, when I mentioned Aunt Mally and the closeness of our families, of Aunt Mally's families and Mom's family and offsprings, including little old me, and when we moved from Aunt Mally's house, Aunt Mally stayed with us. She was a widow at that point, and she stayed with us in our travels. And I was told that during that year or two immediately after the flood, we moved 7 times. That being going from the residence to a local, maybe to a rooming house, to eventually Mom rented an apartment. We lived in at least 2 rented apartments, if I can remember, at my age. And they said, Mom said we moved, they counted 7 times before we got back on East 2nd Street to our Aunt Mally's house, and then to our bungalow up the street where we were living when the water ran us out.
So amazingly, they found a way to dry these things and rehab them a little bit.
Yeah, Jim Kirwin was a graduate engineer from the University of Detroit. He was a chemical engineer, and but he was also very good with his hands. And he basically, as I understood it and what I saw at the time, I used to go and visit as he was rehabbing their house where we had been living when the water came up, and he they had hardwood floors as opposed to pine floors in her home, and he took up all the floors and sanded them, put them back down again. He was amazing versatility, in spite of the fact that he was a graduate engineer. But she didn't. Jim, not being married and being out of college, didn't come back to live permanently with his mother, Aunt Mally, but did live with her while she was moving back into the premises of her house on 2nd Street. And my mother paid somebody, local contractor. I think his name was Hirschfeld. It's a good Irish name, Hirshfeld or something like that. And he came in and tore up the inside of the house and rehabbed it to her satisfaction, except she said, I can remember her saying, Mr. Hirschfeld jacked my house on East 2nd Street up, put it on blocks, and went and moved his workers to some other location and left my house sitting on blocks. And she was going to sue the contractor. I don't know if she ever did, but we did get back in the house, and we lived there for a number of years. And I think there's a picture of maybe a photo of me and one of my school friends in the backyard. That was East 2nd Street, behind the house that Mr. Hirschfeld had rejuvenated, more or less.
Would you assume that I think we talked about this, but there's no insurance or anything, right, Dad?
I don't think she had anything.
She just had to start from scratch.
No, and at one point that she told me, I can remember her saying that we had to move because she didn't have enough money to pay the mortgage on the house. The bank repossessed the bungalow on East 2nd Street, and we, at that point, Mom and Sis and I moved to a rental property.
And how long before you moved up north?
Well, that would have been, the flood was in the early part of 1937, and I don't know how long it was before we got back in the bungalow, but I'm guessing maybe a couple of years. I don't have any recollection of that. And Mom worked for the city of Maysville in the Treasury office, the city treasurer's office, and at one point took a job with what we called in those days civil service. I guess it's still called the same thing, civil service, working for the U.S. government, and this would have been during the 1930s, the Second World War. So that would have been the early 40s, I guess. Yeah, and so when she took the job in working for civil service, it was in Dayton, Ohio. And there was a Wright-Patterson Air Force Base located in Dayton, Ohio, and I think it's still there. And it was during those years, it was quite an important part of the U.S. Defense Department. And Mom worked there during the Wright-Patterson Air Force Base during the week, and came home to Maysville and spent it with Sis and me, who we were living with. Sis and I were living with Aunt Mally back in her house again, and so she was she was basically taking care of us, except we were teenagers, as far as Aunt Mally was concerned. And so we were living with Mom in Aunt Mally's house when Mom took the job in Dayton, Ohio, working for the civil service, and Mom decided it didn't make sense to be traveling between Dayton and Maysville on weekends, and so she arranged for us, Sis, and for me to move with her to Cincinnati, Ohio. And Sis was out of school, out of college at that point, and we went to a secretarial school in Cincinnati, and I was still in high school. And so when we moved with Mom to Cincinnati, and then eventually she was transferred by the government to South Bend. And she said she had 2 or 3 choices of locations where she could be transferred to job-wise, and she took Notre Dame, South Bend, because of primarily Notre Dame. And she enrolled me in a Catholic boys' school called Central Catholic. It was not even there anymore. It was the second floor of a parish grade school, St. Matthew's Parish Grade School. So I finished the last 2 years of high school at Central Catholic in the parish grade school on their second floor, and then I joined the Navy, and that didn't work out for physical reasons, and so I went to enrolled at Notre Dame, and there were government support arrangements that could be made, which they did in my case to pay the tuition at Notre Dame.
How did you pick the Navy?
Navy?
Yeah.
I just decided. Of course, everybody was being drafted at that time because the war was still going on, and I graduated in 1945, and my principal of the Central Catholic High School was Brother Gerard, and he was a Holy Cross brother of the Holy Cross order that was responsible for Notre Dame as they were the ones that started Notre Dame. And I can remember Brother Gerard calling me in and saying, "John, you are a junior, you'll be a senior next year, and age-wise, you're going to be draft age, so you might want to consider graduating from high school here at Central Catholic at the end of your 3rd year rather than waiting for your 4th year, so you won't be drafted, or so you will be out of high school before you are drafted," is I think what he basically said. So he told me that I should, if I was interested, I should make an effort to finish in high school in 3 years rather than 4 years, and he would help me do that, arrange to do that. And so I graduated from, started working. I went to summer school that summer and the following summer to get enough credits to graduate. And so I was thinking about being drafted, and drafted meant generally you would be drafted into the Army, and I heard enough about the war to decide I didn't want to spend a career in the Army, And Jim Kerwin, by the way, was drafted into the Army and was in Europe at that time. And I decided I prefer not to be drafted into the Army. If I was going to be in the military, I'd join the Navy. So I took steps to do that.
When they come in, well, we're almost done, Dad. We can end. Hi, girls.
Hi.
We're just finishing up something.
Sorry.
Dad, did your mom? Do you remember your mom wringing her hands or anything over you joining trying to join the military?
No. You were saying, did she
Get upset?
wring her hands and say, I don't want you to go? No. My mom was not that type of person. She didn't express her emotions in those terms, for example.
Because I had that clip of Uncle Tom saying his mom just acted like she was gnashing her teeth when Dick left the monastery to go to war.
No, I don't remember my mom saying anything. She left it up to me. I don't even remember my discussing joining the military on my own. I don't remember Mom sitting down and saying, well, I don't think you should, John. You should do this or that. I didn't have that kind of relationship. And again, that may have been an indication of the emotional side of our family. I loved her, but I took her for granted. You know, we had a down-to-earth relationship, and she was a good person, and she looked out for me, such as moving to South Bend, so I'd have an opportunity maybe at some point in the future to go to Notre Dame. That was the type of person she was in terms of making plans, but we didn't talk about it.
Now, what was the advantage of graduating in 3 years versus 4? How did that affect
Well,
you?
He could pick rather than being drafted.
Everybody, all males were drafted,
Yeah.
with the exception unless you had political pull or something like that.
Yeah.
There were stories. Well, he doesn't have to go. His dad is in the government, and he got a deferment.
Right.
Whoever it might have been, but everybody on all males typically would expect to get a draft notice and saying you will be called by the U.S. government to serve in the military, and you should plan on being available at the post office in South Bend at such and such a date, and that was the date. In my case, for example, typically I showed up at the post office and got on a bus and came to Indianapolis, and they had one of the buildings in Indianapolis had a physical examination area set up and a bunch of doctors in there, and you went down the line, and each doctor did his thing for you in terms of your heart and your hearing and eyes and so forth and so on.
And so, did you in your mind, were you in other words, did you say, was it like a week, a month, a year before you went for your examination, or the same day?
No, I got out of high school in May, and I think I came to. I joined. The thing that I did time-wise is I immediately. In fact, I think I was probably still in high school. I went to the recruitment office and joined the Navy. I can remember talking to the naval representative and signing the paper, and they would then. I was a recruit, and they would have me sign the proper documents and enlisting, and they would tell me when to show up to be sent to Indianapolis for my physical examination.
And if you have any idea of the time frame after that, and then what exactly happened at the examination?
In the examination,
Yeah. So do you think it was how much longer before you went to Indianapolis? Would you guess?
3 months.
Okay. So when you got to Indianapolis, what happened in the deferment? Or the rejection or whatever?
I can remember getting in line in a public building, a government building. I don't know what the facility was. Probably what we now call an armory. Jane's school has just taken over Riverside? Yeah, and it would have been a building like that, and all the draftees from all over this part of Indiana would be given a time to be delivered there typically by bus, as was my situation. And I don't remember time of day, but I remember going in and there was a lot of activity, and there were lines of teenagers moving in the same direction, and one would be headed towards that room over there where they'd be examining you for heart-related problems. Another would be physical problems, and I can remember the doctor running his finger down my. You had to strip down. Everybody'd be standing around in the nude, and when I bent down to touch my toes, the doctor told me I had curvature of the spine.
And what would that have done? What did he say?
He said, "You won't be accepted. You won't be accepted in the Navy." And he didn't say I wouldn't be accepted in the Army, but that's what happened, because after I was rejected by the Navy as far as my enlistment, I was drafted in the Army several months later, came back to Indianapolis, the same location. I'm sure not the same doctor, but it was a big facility. And the doctor said, well, with your curvature, you won't be, I'll classify you as 4F. They gave everybody a number or a letter. And that was kind of an insult. Say, were you in the Army? No, I was 4F. And that meant physically I wasn't capable of doing the Army deal. And the doctor said, you won't be accepted. You'll be 4F because with your curvature you wouldn't be able to carry the weight of the Army gear that you'd have to have in service to fulfill your Army requirements.
Did you have an emotion with either of those rejections?
No, except I hated the idea that I had to tell people I was 4F. Everybody else was going to the Army, but
you would have, by the time you would have been through basic, the war pretty much would have been over, and you would have just been in the military for 2 years post-war, I'm assuming. In other words, because didn't it end in 45, later in 45? Or was it 46?
Yes, no, it was 45.
So by the time you were done with basic at that point, you probably would have missed the war and just served on the ocean somewhere.
Yeah,
or something.
That's right. I would gone through basic training, as you said. They called it basic training, either Army or Navy, depending on how I ended up getting involved. And I would have been sent to a local Army training center that in Kentucky would have been Fort Knox, maybe. In Indiana, I don't remember what the military points were in Indiana, but I'm sure we've all heard of those. I can't think of them offhand. And you would typically, as I recall, maybe spent 2 or 3 months in basic training, and then they would assign you to further training, either on a military base or to a school someplace. Some guys were assigned to college for specialized training for after their basic training, rather than going otherwise be shipped to Europe.
Yeah, you would have been in post-war peacekeeping and all that.
Yes.
Just to finish up, Dad, because I don't want to keep everybody. I know you had a back operation in the '60s, right? Didn't you have
No,
some sort of operation in the '60s on your back?
not on my back.
Oh.
I'm trying. I don't believe
I thought
I
you had an issue with your back and you had some sort of surgery or
I was in. At one point, I did have back problems, and they put me in a hospital locally in. I guess it would have been South Bend, and or Marion. I'd have to go back and reconstruct that. Time was I was bedridden for less than a month, as I remember.
But that wasn't a procedure, it was
No,
just
no,
rest?
it was just rest.
Oh, okay. I always brag to people that you were one of the few that had successful back surgery, and I've been wrong all this time, which is not surprising.
No, I never had any
Well,
back
I'm going to let my brag stand.
back
You
surgery.
were one of the miracle ones. Dad, just to thank you. I was just going to say, unlike Mom's family and so many people, did you consider going into the clergy at all ever?
No, I didn't. When I was in high school in Maysville, I was under. I don't remember the details, but the nuns, the high school, St. Patrick's High School, was run by the Sisters of St. Francis out of in Iowa. They were a whole, house. I forget what you call the convent.
Whatever,
Yeah, well, there was in Iowa, and they were hired by the Diocese of Covington, Kentucky, which Maysville was a part of. St. Patrick's was a part of that, and one of the nuns, probably the principal, told me that I could have a job working in the local parish rectory after school if I wanted it. So I was continuing to go to high school, but after school I would go from the school down the block to the rectory and work in the office at St. Patrick's for Father Casey, who was the parish priest at that time. And I worked there until I was old enough to graduate, but in the meantime, Mom decided to move to South Bend, and so I had worked for Father Casey in the rectory after school for maybe something over a year, and I had to tell him that I was going to be moving and leave. I can remember him saying he was sorry, but he's sorry I was going to go.
But you didn't have a taste for the clergy.
Oh, you asked me about the clergy. No, he was a very mild-mannered priest, very spiritual, and I can remember him asking me if I had any interest in becoming a priest. And I remember telling him I didn't think I did. So that was the closest I'd come to being a priest, joining the seminary. Jim Kerwin had been through somewhat in 20 years or so before that. In his experience, had been encouraged to go to the seminary, but he did go to St. Meinrad's in Indiana. He was living in Maysville at the time. That was his home, and he spent a year at St. Meinrad's.
Did you consider not having a dad, Jim Kerwin, more of a brother or a father figure? In other words, a father figure.
No, brother figure.
Okay.
Yeah, I trailed along behind him, doing whatever he was doing, and learning a little bit more as a father, as a brother figure.
Okay.
I thought he was my older brother.
Okay. Well, thank you, Dad. Thanks for sitting
Well
down
done.
a while.
You're welcome.